And it did take 15 years, or maybe 20 years, but we had very effective steps taken to address it. And at the time I was freaked out thinking, oh my God, 20 years will be awful, but it did happen. And we don't have 20 years, clearly, obviously here. And so it's a different scale, a different sense of urgency, but we can act. We just have to turn up the speed here. But the public's awareness is very recent, for one thing. And also, we live in this world where we think everyone knows what we know because we've heard Cameron and others for a long time. And people at our company might know it in some communities, but the Pew Research Center, in May, they had a study that said overall 71% of Americans say there is solid evidence of higher global temperatures, compared with 77% of the year before, so it's down a little. And there is less of a consensus among the cause of global warming. This is the key one. Roughly half of Americans, 47%, say the Earth is warming because of human activity. That's half of the Americans who haven't completely bought into this yet. It's a lot better. Half is way up from what it was 2 years before, thanks to Al Gore and IPCC scientists and so forth. But we have a long way to go and very little time. And that's why when Cameron goes out and speaks to the legislature or something, it has a profound effect. And it's essential for everyone to see that stuff. In fact, we borrowed, with permission, many of Cameron's slides, and every employee at Stonyfield is trained when they start at Stonyfield for a day-long training in climate change and organic. The other issue I think is that it's a challenge is that it is so big and so daunting. It takes extraordinary leadership. And, when you're dealing with school budget infrastructures and war and all these other things that are right now, and that seems like, oh, we don't have to do this second, just sort of what Cam was talking about. We get caught up in the day-to-day stuff, and that's where it takes enormous pressure to keep people focused on that urgency. And also, as much as all of us have known how urgent this is, the recent slides, the things this year about circumnavigating, the North Pole for the first time, the real urgency has really surprised all of us, how fast it's happened. So we're all just coalescing and organizing and ready to start implementing so many of these things. We really are on the cusp of some incredible things, I'm sure. So I wanted to just to keep this short. So what can you do? I just thought have students here want to focus on that. Obviously, the biggest thing you could do is Tuesday. You can register at the polls day of if you haven't. Vote. 8 years ago in New Hampshire, I think Gore lost New Hampshire by 2,000 votes. That is probably have more students on campus that don't vote than that. If you don't think your vote's important, you're wrong. Second thing is let your voice be heard in an effective manner. Learn how to be effective at making your voice heard. And also, don't underestimate, it's hard. I was at a workshop recently with a PR person, and she was talking about how the scale of the problem, all these words are so big, and then we talk about the solutions, and we talk about change your light bulbs, little things. And it's hard to come up with a feeling of that you're doing something that can really make a difference on this huge thing. And you cannot underestimate the value of your own personal actions. And really try and figure out for your own self, how do you significantly reduce your own carbon footprint? What's your personal sustainability plan? It has a way of changing people around you, and it really does cause change. What are you doing in your community, your dorm, your apartment, etc.? Finally, just because I remember when I was in college, and the time the nuclear arms race just felt like the end of the world was near. And I was talking to a professor of mine who had been an Anne Frank. She had been, the first 5 years of her life, had been in an attic in Europe during World War II. And she said, Nancy, every generation has this feeling. Every generation has their crisis that they feel is the end of the world. And so it's really important that we realize that we do have this amazing way of learning and overcoming obstacles and challenges, and that as depressing as some of the stuff can be, I am optimistic. I feel like there's enormous opportunity out there for us to reinvent learn from our mistakes. We have all the information that we need, all the technologies here, even without, lots of big advances and so forth, to make the changes that Cameron was talking about. So don't get overwhelmed by despair, or we have no chance of being effective at all. Thank you.
Speaker is Reverend Roberta Finkelstein. She's the minister of South Church, the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Portsmouth. Before moving to New England 2.5 years ago, she served several churches around the D.C. Beltway, so she knows firsthand the ill effects of excess carbon emissions. In her first career, she was a nurse midwife working with a low-income adolescent pregnancy population in Washington. Reverend Finkelstein is the current chair of the Unitarian Universalist Action Network of New Hampshire, a statewide social justice advocacy network based on the affirmation of both inherent individual worth and the interconnected web of all existence. Reverend.
Thank you. Is this? Yes, okay. So as a parish minister, I come about this a little differently from a different perspective. I was thinking about if I did a PowerPoint, what would the slides be? And I decided not to do a PowerPoint as a result. The primary question I ask myself always when we think about involving ourselves as a congregation or as a religious movement in a civic issue is, what does a faithful response look like? What is a faithful response to climate change? And to answer that question, I have to begin with the worldview. So I believe that creation is good, very good even, to use the language of Genesis, and that I believe that just as every human being is born with inherent worth and dignity, so all life is interconnected. That's what we believe, that all life is interconnected, that all living creatures and the planet that supports that life and the universe beyond it, all of that is precious and worthy of our very best care. Our life on this earth is a gift. The earth itself is a gift, and we're the stewards of something vast and complex and beautiful and vulnerable. And I think it's our understanding of the vulnerability of the life on earth that is relatively new to religious people. For me, stewardship is a spiritual discipline. It is being conscious of the fact that the earth we inhabit has intrinsic value. It's not just the value of raw materials that we can take and make into something for human endeavor. There's intrinsic value. We didn't build it, we didn't earn it, but we now know that through carelessness and inattention, we are destroying it. Our job as faithful human beings, as stewards, is to nurture and protect this earth and make sure that we pass it on to the next generation as unsullied as possible. This is not just Unitarian Universalist theology, by the way. Many of my evangelical Christian colleagues have also come to embrace the idea of faithful environmental stewardship. They too believe in the sacredness of creation, in our obligation to be responsible stewards, in the very real danger of unchecked human production and consumption, defiling this creation that was deemed very good. Other faiths are also coming to recognize the necessity of a faithful response to the crisis of climate change and global warming. And we will all work together on this issue across denominational lines, across nations, to preserve what we've been giving. Another aspect of worldview is to assert a culture of abundance rather than a culture of scarcity. This is important because scarcity pits us against each other. Scarcity says that we cannot afford to worry about carbon emissions when the Dow is down. The recent economic news notwithstanding, I personally feel called to reject efforts to parse out such things as sustainability and economic justice as though we can only do one of them at a time. There are those who would have you believe that you have to make a choice among these issues. Already we are seeing the news stories that tell us that as people worry more about the economy, climate change and sustainability fade in importance. I reject the assumption that Americans are capable of only thinking of one important thing at a time, just as I reject